Hi, everyone, and welcome to another installment of the Arkansas Alumni Association's Lunch and Learn series. We're really glad you're here to join us today. My name is Mary Kate Harrison, and I am the Executive Projects Coordinator here at the Alumni Association. Today, we have a special presentation from Dean Peter MacKeith of the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design. And in order to ensure that everyone can hear our presentation, please keep your mics on mute throughout the presentation. And to introduce Dean MacKeith today, we have one of our Alumni Association National Board of Directors members, and he is also an alumni of the School of Architecture himself, Mr. Robert Koenig. Robert is an associate principal with the Turner HL Architects in Kansas City, Missouri. Thanks for being here with us today, Robert.
Thank you, Mary Kate. Well, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker. He is a friend, a mentor, and a motivator of me, having really brought me back on campus as he arrived on campus a few years ago. And so I'm very pleased to introduce him today. Peter MacKeith is Dean and Professor of Architecture at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas. Appointed in July of 2014 and reappointed for a second 5-year term in 2019, he is the 5th Dean of the school and a nationally recognized design educator and administrator. From 1999 to 2014, MacKeith was Associate Dean, Professor of Architecture and Associate Curator for Architecture and Design at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. MacKeith was the Director of the Master of Architecture International Program at Helsinki University of Technology, Finland from 1995 to 1999, and he held previous academic and administrative appointments at the University of Virginia and Yale University. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Literature and International Relations with distinction as an Eccles Scholar from the University of Virginia in 1981, and his Master of Architecture and the Alpha Rho Chi Medal from Yale University in 1985. MacKeith has been recognized twice by Design Intelligence as the Design Educator of the Year, both in 2017 and 2019, and twice by the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture with national awards for creative achievement and design education for his design studio teaching and curatorial work. He is a recipient of research and exhibition grants from the U.S. Forest Service's Wood Innovations Programs, the Graham Foundation of the Advancement of the Visual Arts, the National Science Foundation, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Finnish Cultural Foundation. He is the author or editor of 12 books, most recently Louis I. Kahn, The Nordic Latitudes, and Housing Northwest Arkansas, A Challenge and Initiative of Response, and has served as editor of the Yale Architectural Journal and the SOM Journal. MacKeith serves as chair of the advisory committee for the Northwest Arkansas Design Excellence Program, a regional initiative of the Walton Family Foundation, and is a member of the editorial board of Places Journal for Architecture, Landscape Architecture, and Urbanism. He also serves as special advisor to the Chancellor for Campus Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas. He is currently overseeing the completion of a $75 million capital campaign for the Fay Jones School and guiding the design and construction of the Anthony Timberland Center for Design and Materials Innovation, a regional center for research and development of new wood products and new approaches in sustainable construction materials. Since receiving a Fulbright Fellowship to Finland in 1990, MacKeith has worked as a liaison between the architecture, art, and design cultures of the United States, Finland, and the Nordic region through educational programs, teaching, exhibitions, and publications. He has written and lectured extensively on modern contemporary Finnish and Nordic architecture. With support from the Finland 100 Centennial Fund, MacKeith conceived and curated the 2017-2018 exhibition for the Finnish Embassy in Washington, D.C., The Iconic and the Everyday, Creative Finland in the United States. From 2016 to 2019, he was the Centennial Lecturer in Architecture for the Finlandia Foundation. He was curator for Lighthouses on Nordic Common Ground, the exhibition of the Nordic Pavilion in Venice, Italy in 2012. Working with the Museum of the Finnish Architecture, the Swedish Center for Architecture and Design, and the Norwegian Museums of Art and Architecture. He has also led the organization of exhibitions and conferences in the United States with the National Building Museum, the Cooper Hewitt, Smithsonian Design Museum, the Brookings Institute, and the Kemper Art Museum at Washington University in St. Louis. MacKeith served as honorary consul for Finland in the state of Missouri from 2012 to 2014, and is a member of the Finnish Cultural Institute and New York Advisory Board. In 2014, he was installed as a Knight, First Class of the Order of the Lion of Finland in recognition of his contributions to the advancement of Finnish culture. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Peter MacKeith. Glass of water for me.
That's an awful lot. Maybe we should all just take a break. But I want to welcome everyone to this presentation and hopefully discussion, if time allows, in our hour. I want to thank the Arkansas Alumni Association for their invitation and their organization this afternoon. I'm very grateful, as always, to the leadership of the association by Brandy Cox-Jackson, and very much today indebted to Mary Kate Harrison and all of her work to put all this together. Before I go any further, I want to note and congratulate the two new members of the Arkansas Alumni Association's board, who are in fact graduates, alumni of the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design. Not only Robert Koenig, who you just heard from, but also as well, importantly, Kathleen Gonzalez, who is a more recent graduate, graduating from our Bachelor of Landscape Architecture Studies program just a few years ago. In all respects, it's a great pleasure to speak to everyone listening in today. I've had the privilege of doing this once before in person to the Alumni Association chapter in Dallas, and that proved to be extremely productive and stimulating for my own thinking. But this afternoon, I want to turn to perhaps not really the past of the school, but in fact, the present and the future of the school. And I'd like to couch this perhaps both in philosophical terms, but also in current event terms. The lecture is entitled, as you'll soon see, Design for Health and Wellness. And we will ultimately come to some very specific understandings of what that means. But as we begin, I would like to plant effectively in your mind this image, which is fundamentally, foundationally on the future of our society, the young people who we work with, who we really have to point forward in a productive and optimistic way. And equally, on the top half of the image, really an emblem, let's say, of the natural world or the landscape that we inhabit and our responsibilities toward the larger environment, both natural and built. These are framing concepts for me on a daily basis, but certainly within the context of this lecture, equally important as frameworks. So, yes, this will be ultimately a presentation of ideas related to the value of design. I would say the important value of design to the greater cause of health and wellness, both at the individual level, but I will argue at the societal level and very much at the environmental level. All those scales are relevant and important to bear in mind. A bit of a framework at the level of the university, if you will. You may know that Chancellor Steinmetz, on his arrival not too many years ago, worked through with faculty and students and staff a set of guiding priorities for the university. And one of those, they are not actually listed in any hierarchical fashion, all equivalent priorities, but one of those important guiding priorities that Chancellor Steinmetz brought forward was the reaffirmation of the University of Arkansas's land grant and flagship responsibilities. It is, I think, essential for us all to continue to not only grasp this fact of what we are as a university, a public land grant university, founded, as we know, in 1871, soon to be 150 years old. Not only to grasp that as a fact, but to grasp it in its mission or in its import. One of the texts which I have referred to in coming to understand this fact and its relevance to design education has been this book, shown on the left of your screens, Land Grant Universities for the Future, Higher Education for the Public Good. And in sum, the book suggests that university leaders and supporters should be that much more fiercely devoted to the land grant orientation that they have. They should more vigorously uphold their common and focused missions through teaching, research, and service-oriented activities. I take this to be an obligation. Chancellor Steinmetz is very clear when he describes the threefold mission of a land grant university. Number one, serve the people of the state. Number two, serve the people of the state. And number three, not surprisingly, but logically, serve the people of the state. And I believe that this is actually our obligation as a school as much as a university. And through the service, through design of the people of the state, we are actually able to prepare our students for design futures in the state, beyond the state, across the nation, and really anywhere in the world that they choose to go. It's useful in this context as well to perhaps relate to the point of petition both the mission of the university, but actually as an extension, the mission of the school. The school advances design excellence through a multidisciplinary, place-responsive design education in service to Arkansas, the nation, and the world. This is, in fact, a telescopic extension out of the university's mission itself. And our vision, too, has that relationship to the university's own vision. The university's vision being to represent the best of public higher education, advancing Arkansas while building a better world. The school's vision, therefore, as an extension, is to design a more resilient future, a more humane and resilient future for the state of Arkansas, the nation, and the world. And much is embedded in these statements, which I actually hope to unpack a bit for us now as the afternoon goes along. But here again, framing principles, framing images, framing understandings altogether of the role and importance that design can have in all of our lives. Now, in speaking to alumni in particular, I think it's important to note that we as a School of Architecture and Design in the United States are honored and privileged by being, at this point, really the only school to be named in honor of an architect. Only, I say, after that of the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture at Taliesin West, but the only school, I believe, situated within a Research One university. And it does, in fact, necessitate an initial question here. What does it mean to be a school named in honor of Fay Jones? If you know of Fay Jones and you know of his work, it's important to understand that Fay Jones was a consummate professional. He was, in fact, both a professional in practice, but also a professional in education. And for him, those two callings were connected, almost synonymous. He was committed to the act of building and building well, and he was committed to the act of building well in service to his clients at scales large and small. For us as a school, to be named in honor of Fay Jones does not mean that we educate our students to imitate the work or the appearance of Fay Jones, but we certainly see Fay Jones as a model, at least one of many, certainly a primary one, a model of professionalism and professionalism in practice and education for all of our students. And this emphasis upon excellence in practice and excellence in education, you may know that Fay Jones was the 1990 recipient of the AIA Gold Medal just 30 years ago. and brought to spotlight to the school, the university, and the state of Arkansas with that honor. We feel that obligation keenly to remain committed to design excellence in our faculty and to propose to our students through our faculty models of excellence. It perhaps is overstating the case to say that we currently enjoy a very strong reputation nationally amongst schools of architecture and design, as you can see, and that equally our faculty have been honored in landscape architecture, in interior design, in architecture, in community design, and preservation design. All of this speaks to that legacy of Fay Jones and that obligation towards design excellence in education that we feel very keenly. And yet, I come back to this continuing history, and in fact, the ongoing future of the school more particularly. Because with the legacy of Fay Jones in hand, we have a superb platform now on which to advance as a school, to advance in design education, to advance the university. In 2013, many will know that we dedicated this new portion of the School of Architecture and Design, the Stephen L. Anderson Design Center, as it joined to the existing Vol Walker Hall. And so the school brought together for the first time in 2013 all three design disciplines on the campus: landscape architecture, interior design, and architecture, under the same roof for the very first time in its history. This offered us the opportunity as a school to move forward into what really is the defining condition of contemporary design practice now, which is collaboration and interdisciplinary work in order to address extremely complex challenges that design professionals face at every scale, in every situation, with every client and every commission. So the school was growing as I arrived in 2014, growing into this new facility, expanding its reach by virtue of bringing all three disciplines together. And it has continued to grow in its physical character as well as in its outreach. The University of Arkansas Community Design Center, led by Professor Stephen Luoni and a great staff, moved into new premises in the Pryor Center on the downtown square of Fayetteville just after I arrived as well. And through this facility, and now through the addition of the University of Arkansas Resiliency Center in this same, on these same premises, the CDC and the Resiliency Center are able to extend the outreach of the school out across the state, across the nation, and internationally through the work they do. We, of course, as many, in fact, do not know, are privileged by the presence of Garvin Woodland Gardens, the 210-acre woodland preserve in Hot Springs, Arkansas, a very important part of the school, an extension of its classrooms, its studios, its laboratories into the outdoor landscape, into the center of Arkansas, attracting many, many visitors from across the country, but ever more, increasingly more, a location for our studies in landscape architecture, in architecture, and overall in timber and wood design, as well as resiliency design. Here too, the school has expanded itself, made itself larger, and continued its growth and its outreach. And on the near horizon, and I say that quite realistically because we will begin soon, excuse me, the design and construction efforts for the Anthony Timberland Center for Design and Materials Innovation, located on the south side of Fayetteville on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, adjacent to new facilities for the School of Art. This building, to be designed by the Pritzker Prize award-winning architects, Grafton Architects of Dublin, Ireland, working with Modus Studio here in Fayetteville, will soon begin its design and construction phase as the fall semester begins. So in all ways, physical ways, certainly, the school has grown, continues to grow, and will continue to grow in the future. But it is so that at the heart of the work that we do at the school remain our students and our faculty. And if you were a student in the school, you would recognize very much the rigors of the education, the emphases of the education, and certainly the energies of the students as they present themselves on a daily basis in the school, from reviews to outreach programs into the city of Fayetteville through the Department of Landscape Architecture, as shown here, exhibitions and public programs that now inhabit the school on a regular basis, very active fabrication laboratories on a daily basis, working through a range of materials and a range of scales, models, furniture, large-scale assemblies, and continuing to uphold that obligation towards design excellence in the very work that our students are doing. Shown here is an example of a furniture design that was the product of a design studio a year and a half ago, in which ultimately this chair and 12 others were shown at the ICFF, the International Contract Furniture Fair in New York City, for the first time, an Arkansas furniture presence in that international location. And equally, our alumni continue to distinguish themselves and further distinguish the school. And with this one image, I can only indicate in outline form the prolific accomplishments of our many alumni across the nation and the world in all the work that they do. This is an image from Joe Weishar's competition-winning design for the World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C., which is currently, in fact, fully approved by the Capital Fine Arts Commission and is already in construction and construction administration. Here too, as I say, this is continuing the legacy of Faye Jones and our early graduates, but extending it already into the future, sheerly on the basis of excellence in education and excellence in practice. But I would say, at long last, that this is not enough. That the Faye Jones School of Architecture and Design, in fact, is well poised to be more, and to be more than what it ever has been in order to respond to more than it ever has been able to respond to. This is perhaps most crystallized by current events, but not exclusively so. Current events where we are in 2020 do pose important questions for us all, whatever our calling is, intellectually and creatively in society. And the School of Architecture and Design, all schools of architecture and design, I contend, must answer to those complex calls. So here is the beginning, at least, of a refrain that I will sound throughout this presentation. What does it mean to be the Faye Jones School of Architecture and Design in 2020? What should be, or even more imperatively, what must be the work of the school in 2020? We know that we are currently, in a sense, reliving history all at the same time. But if we, in fact, are close on to the point of celebrating what would have been the 100th birthday of Faye Jones, born in 1921, we should recognize that as a school, in some sense, and as a university, we have been here before. We have experienced a pandemic in 1918 of devastating effect. And we, of course, live within these extremely serious and complex conditions right now. We have, of course, lived through a Great Depression from 1929 to 1933, and subsequent recessions, however we wish to define them, certainly. And yes, we currently, of course, face similar conditions at this moment, to a certain extent, attached to the effects of the pandemic, but not exclusively so. And as many of our alumni remind me as I talk to them in their work out in the world, it is important for all architects and designers to grasp the economic realities in which they live, the need for financial planning, the need to, in a sense, understand what could well occur over and over again in the context of their professional careers, which is to say an economic downturn, if not an outright recession. We have been here before, we are here now, we need to be thinking about it still. And yes, very much, we have a much longer history than just 1968 recognizes of of racism and the struggle for civil rights in this country. We have been here in 1968, and we are here again now. These are issues that our university takes extremely seriously, and certainly our school does as well. And we would contend as a school that we have a role to play in addressing these issues as much as economic issues or health issues. And lastly, in this parade of conditions, there has been, of course, a succession of points of recognition of environmental crisis. Recognized in one sense on university campuses by the onset of Earth Day in 1970, succeeded by oil crisis after oil crisis in the last 40 years. We have been here before, we are here now. I will say that I began the required course in architectural theory this past spring in January by introducing our students, not really, I think, introducing them, but certainly having them read the very simple words of this young Swedish girl in order to stimulate their thinking and to activate their sense of responsibility. And here too, the understanding of our obligations to this current and future generations of young people are no more better represented than through the words and work of Greta Thunberg. What is perhaps unusual is the multi-dimensional character of the times in which we live, of simultaneously working, hopefully in a consensus-built way, to address simultaneously conditions of pandemic, recession, racial struggle, and economic crisis. We believe as a school that it is part of our mission to prepare our students to work in these causes and to address, as I have said from the outset, the complex challenges of the contemporary world. How we do that is really where I'd like to take us now, or how we propose to do that at least, is where I'd like to take our discussion as we move forward. So to repeat, in this context, what does it mean to be the Fay Jones School in 2020? What must be our work? How do we best understand the context in which we live and the ways in which we can work through design to address these challenges? I'm going to return us to that framing image at the beginning of the presentation, one that really is an abstract, in a visual sense, of these two understandings here. That the work of the architect, the work of the landscape architect, the work of the interior designer, the work of anyone in design, I will propose, is framed by a social foundation and an environmental ceiling. And if you think that we are too far away from the basic principles of Fay Jones's approach, or in fact that we are hewing rather closely to Fay Jones's principled approach to architecture, we're abstracting them perhaps, but simply to look at Thorncrown Chapel is to understand the value of the foundation, the value of the roof and the ceiling, and all of the structures in between. This, for me, is where the legacy of Fay Jones remains quite instructive. And from this, we can extend forward into not just this text-based understanding or this almost sentimental image understanding, but in fact, we can begin to look at this kind of diagram as the context truly that now frames the work of the architect, the work of the landscape architect, the work of the interior designer, anyone working in the current moment, I would propose should at least be attempting to work within that safe and just space for humanity that really believes or begins to imagine a regenerative economy. Now, this is not my idea, I will say. This is, in fact, a proposition of a circular economy, which is very much now being examined across the world. And it is, in fact, often characterized as a donut economy, to be somewhat humorous about this. But I think it's clear exactly what is meant by a social foundation and the variety of factors that can be addressed through design towards a social foundation, and the ecological ceiling and the variety of factors that condition how we can work in design as well. We attempt, in one way or another, to position our students in that green space to work productively towards both directions. That is, in fact, I think, an important framework for it to grasp overall as a school, across our departments, across our disciplines, across our centers, really in the greater cause of design. In a quite important way, this economic understanding and societal understanding and environmental understanding is captured already within the multiple statements by our professional organizations in architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design, and as well as by the educational organizations that extend out of those professional organizations. That is to say, the AIA, the National Council of Architecture Registration Boards, the National Association of Accreditation, National Architecture Accreditation Boards, and their equivalents in landscape architecture and interior design, all have very clearly focused on issues of health, safety, welfare, and importantly, dignity as defining components of what it is to be a professional, and we contend in the school what it is to be a student, to work towards the public good in health, safety, welfare, and dignity. We find this very clearly in the AIA's published ethics statement from quite recently, 2017, in which the general obligations are outlined, but it in fact goes even further and in more detail, that members shall employ their professional knowledge and skill to design buildings and spaces that will enhance and facilitate human dignity and the health, safety, and welfare of the individual and the public. This is equally resounded within the practice and discipline of landscape architecture, also understood as a public health, safety, and welfare profession and education. And the work that landscape architects do is of ever greater importance in terms of environmental awareness, environmental sustainability, resiliency overall, and ultimately with a great effect upon our society, our economy, our culture, and so forth. To be that much more specific, everything that we encounter in the public domain, pathways, plazas, parks, walls, grading, the control of water, whether it's stormwater management or rising sea levels, all of this falls now within the domain of landscape architects working in concert with architects and urban planners. And it is equally the case in the profession and education for interior designers. Here too, public health, safety, and welfare through interior designers' attention to air quality, issues of accessibility, fire safety, and ergonomics in furniture design, in spatial design altogether. All of these are harnessed to the public good, public health, safety, and welfare. This is where I contend again that this larger charge that we have through design, through all of our professional practices, all of our professional education, surely must be focused now on an expanded, emphatic concentration upon issues of health, which is physical, emotional, and social well-being, safety for occupants, users, and others affected by buildings, sites, rooms, furniture, welfare, equally, as well as ultimately dignity. That is to say, can we, through design, provide honor and respect to the individual and the public? You may think that I am sounding, as almost always in a predictable way, sounding an idealistic, even altruistic perspective. But to a certain extent, I would contend, and although I'm happy to have this discussion, that the combined effect of pandemic, recession, civil rights struggle, and environmental crisis is precisely because we have, in some sense, lost sight of those ideals, lost sight of the ability to work with true respect for each other, and respect for the environment as well, near and far. How this extends through the professions and through education certainly emphasizes a responsibility, an understanding, and then a responsibility to issues of climate change, issues of renewable energy, issues of resiliency, and yes, very much to the combined effects, as I've said, to the multiple circumstances that we are facing right now. To become more specific, however, what can we do, and in fact, what are we doing in the school at this point in order to live up to these responsibilities of the current moment and into the future? Architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design always, at the least, must have a positive vision of what is possible, as well as a foresighted vision of what would be necessary, what can be done to benefit the health, safety, and welfare of the people with whom we work. This, I would say, to some extent, argues for an expansion of the school beyond its physical limits, an expansion of the school beyond the boundaries of its disciplines, an expansion of its ambitions and its resources in order to be fully effective, in order to be truly living up to the responsibilities of a school of architecture and design situated in a public land-grant university, obligated virtuously to serve the needs of the state of Arkansas and citizens beyond. Again, the framework here, sentimentally, but this does then lead me to perhaps a radical proposition, simply for the sake of argument, that it is possible in many ways, I would contend, to not only see the School of Architecture and Design as that, but in a deeper way, in an expanded way, to also see the School of Architecture and Design as simultaneously a school of public health and wellness. That is, by definition, of course, what our professions ask for us to be fundamentally concerned with health, safety, and welfare, and therefore to work in this cause of public health and wellness from the vantage point of a public university. Now, I could say in one very specific way that we've already, as a school, begun to demonstrate what we can do in a very small and limited way to the concerns of public health, at least locally. And here I want to commend the work of our fabrication staff and many of our students who've worked really since the middle of March to produce innumerable face shields and intubation boxes for hospitals, community health centers, a whole range of medical care facilities, and for healthcare workers more generally. This is certainly one way, small, effective, but I think absolutely important to recognize a way in which the school can be harnessed towards public good, public health, and towards the circumstances of the current moment. But that is in many ways not enough. As I say, the school must be more ambitious, more expansive, more in outreach. And the propositions that we make now are that the complex challenges that we face actually require multiple interlocking agendas and programs in which the strengths of architecture are harnessed to the strengths of landscape architecture, are harnessed to the strengths of interior design, are harnessed to the strengths of community design, so as to benefit the greater good of public health, safety, and welfare. We're doing this in part through initiating a number of concentrations at the graduate level for the school. In fact, much of what I will propose from here on out has its correlative as a concentration within our graduate programs now. But all of what I propose is based out of the strengths and continuing strengths of our core disciplines of architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design. And now we have the ability to focus these in more synthetic ways in order to produce students and graduates who are even more well prepared to address circumstances now and into the future. In combination, those issues relate to the wise use of materials. It certainly relates to the proposition for an ever more carbon neutral world. These relate to issues of housing. These relate to issues of transportation, relate to issues of public space, resiliency, and wellness. And in the cause of wellness, we have begun initial, very exploratory conversations with the newly announced Whole Health Institute in Bentonville in order to understand how we might be able to be of benefit to their programs, to their agendas and their ambitions. Something we very much look forward to as a school. But even so, as a school, we would already propose that through a range of new agendas, new programs, new collaborative undertakings, we are already working to that greater good of health, safety, and wellness. Here is one way of diagramming it, that the extension of the school in these various agendas has taken shape in housing, in mass timber, and material innovation, in preservation design, in resiliency design, community design, and ultimately health and wellness design. The questioning refrain continues. What does it mean to be a school in the middle of one of the nation's highest concentrations of mid-century modernist design? We have acquired the Fay and Gus Jones house that the young architect in 1955 designed for his family, and have carefully restored that and are now bringing it back to larger life. This signals a new and expanded commitment of the school to preservation design, preserving the history, material history of the state, and beginning to lend our expertise to many other efforts across the state and nationwide. Further work that we're doing for other homes more locally, as well as assisting the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in its interpretation of its own mid-century modernist masterpiece, the Usonian House by Frank Lloyd Wright, on the grounds of that museum. Again, an expanded agenda synthesizing architecture, landscape architecture, interior design for the public good. What does it mean to be a school of architecture and design in the middle of one of the nation's leading high growth, low density populations, which is precisely the condition now prevailing in Northwest Arkansas and elsewhere across the country and even the world? We have worked through initiatives with the Walton Family Foundation in housing, through initiatives with Pine Bluff redevelopment, to work increasingly across the state. Here you're looking at images of our community design centers, proposed work for the city of Pine Bluff in its redevelopment through housing and, in fact, the revitalization of its downtown district. Here we're seeing further propositions for the city of Conway and the work in low growth community design in order to manage the flow of water relative to new housing developments. And we've worked with great particularity at the more focused scale in the proposition of new housing, affordable housing prototypes here constructed for families in the city of Little Rock, in the Petaway district. What does it mean to be a school working in the middle of one of the nation's designated resiliency regions? For those who've lived in Arkansas, you know that we are in the middle of Tornado Alley. We are somewhere to the west of the New Madrid fault line. We're somewhere to the north of the Mississippi floodplain, and we're somewhere to the east of whatever is happening in Oklahoma. So we have, in a sense, the need to be prepared and to lend our expertise through that preparation to the cause of resiliency north, south, east, and west. And we're doing that through a variety of proposals. Here, trying to understand how Fayetteville and Northwest Arkansas could become self-sustaining in terms of food production and food distribution. Here, looking at agriculture production centers working with the College of Agriculture and the Arkansas Division of Agriculture. What does it mean, perhaps more in a larger, more expanded role when we are surrounded by several of the nation's leading data and logistics-driven corporations? What possible role can that have in terms of how we think of ourselves as a school? As those in practice know, data and the concept and the visualization of data, the spatialization of data is ever more a part of our professional work. We are preparing our students through an emphasis on building information modeling, integrated project delivery, and altogether understanding both the limits, the virtues, and the opportunities available through the conversion of data into spatial visualization. Here you see examples from our faculty as well as from our building design that bring that issue forward. And as many know, we have asked the question now quite productively, what does it mean when, as a school, when we look at a state obligated to the state and we see a state that is 60% covered in forest, that is leaving as much as 15 million tons of surplus fiber on the floor of the forest as an environmental hazard every year, and leaving as much as estimated between $7 and $12 billion of value-added economy left unaddressed over time. We believe we can have a role in this, just as we have had in resiliency, in housing, in preservation. We have posited, of course, Arkansas as a forested state, as a sustainable state, in which the work we do in wood design and innovation can benefit so many in this type of circular economy, bring jobs, and we believe we've had a positive role already now in the state, including a role in bringing a new engineered timber manufacturing plant to the city of Conway just last December. And we've done this through research and teaching in the school, returning wood as a legitimate material for consideration in the design agendas of the school. And we've taken our students into the forest, into the sawmills, into the rural communities that really underlie that forest economy of the state. We have made increasing use, as I've said before, of Garvin Woodland Gardens in this cause. And in fact, now are working with the gardens and with the people in South Arkansas to bring into being what will be called the Whipple Family Forest Education Center, a center for education and inspiration for all who come to visit it, to come to know the virtues and values of Arkansas forests, its timber and wood product industries. This, of course, these are images of the Evans Treehouse, itself made of Arkansas-sourced wood, and itself already a place for education for the young and old who visit the gardens. And yes, we will be, as I have said before, signaling this in a very substantial way by spring of 2023, when we dedicate this building, the Anthony Timberland Center for Design and Materials Innovation, the locus for all of our initiatives in this particular area. And lastly, what does it mean to be a school that is and must be committed to racial and social justice? If we look at the great pioneers of the state of Arkansas in the civil rights struggle, what can we be doing as a school in order to further this legacy in particular? We must be building with increasing intensity and productivity. We must be building an enrollment to our school and our university which truly reflects the diversity of the state, the region, and the nation. These are efforts that are ongoing, but they are certainly intensifying and are going to be very much a part of our agenda going forward. We are, in fact, beginning that effort and have begun that effort already for some years through the outreach programs that we do now across the state, educating young people in kindergarten, in 6th grade, in 8th grade, in 10th grade, in 6 locations across the state, in what we have called Design Camp for now almost 15 years. And even if Design Camp cannot occur physically this summer, we have converted all of our Design Camp programs into online episodes that will be broadcast soon on the Faye Jones YouTube channel, as well as in the, using the Arkansas PBS Educational Network to broadcast segments all across the state. We must begin to infuse the young people of the state in all regions with the belief that design can be for the good of their lives and for the good of their communities. And it very much has to start in the early years continue all the way through the point of application into the university, and it very much necessitates the engagement with communities all across the state in order to understand, everyone to understand, that design is truly for the public health, safety, welfare, and wellness. This, at long last, brings me perhaps to the issue that maybe has been most in people's mind. What does it mean for a School of Architecture and Design to work in a state with urgent healthcare and aging issues? What can our school be doing is the question that we are posing to ourselves in the cause of health and wellness in these specific areas. We would say that this is an intergenerational design condition. It is not one that excludes those who are older from those who are younger. It in fact seeks to connect those who are younger with those who are older to the greater good of all generations. It certainly needs to be a conversation about how we all in fact age. We all in fact age in place. We all need to be understood as the beneficiaries of design for aging, young and old. We know that this can be, in fact, affected through thoughtful, good design for everyone of any age that can exist at the scale of product design. We know it can exist at the scale even of the hand. We know it can exist at the scale of the thoughtfully designed room for those who wish to age in place, how even to retrofit or redesign existing spaces as much as to design new ones. And we also know and believe that there is a possibility, certainly on our campus, as has occurred on many other campuses, to consider the possibility of aging in place here at the University of Arkansas. For those who wish, in a sense, to benefit from the university by returning to the university, we believe that there is, in fact, very particular projects for us to be considering all through the scale of public space, of housing, of materials and construction. It is a known fact that, a documented fact, that retirees want active, intellectually stimulating, intergenerational retirement environments. We believe that there is precedent for this all across the country, and that the University of Arkansas, through the loyalty of its alumni, the commitment of its alumni, offers itself as a possibility, a real opportunity to consider such an intergenerational community in the cause of health, safety, welfare, and wellness altogether. This is very much on our minds now, along with the multiple agendas that I've indicated. And it returns us again, ultimately, to what does it mean to work in the present moment? It means to be working with a conscious awareness of the responsibilities we have to our past, to the legacy of our alumni, the legacy of our namesake, but certainly with a very conscious awareness that these current circumstances must be addressed in complex, interconnected ways in order to point the way towards a better future. Again, I continue to come back to this framework. I continue to believe that there are multiple points forward for us to be working on, and I welcome your questions. But before I do so, I want to leave you with this most recently produced aspect of the school's virtual education.
Welcome to the Faye Jones School of Architecture and Design.
Design is only limited by your imagination.
Design is innovation in material technologies. Design is working with your community.
There's no greater charge that can be posed on us than the opportunity to really make people happy.
Design is learning different perspectives.
Design is thinking about the environment.
Design improves people's quality of life.
Having the opportunity to creatively solve problems.
Welcome to the transformative world of design.
Welcome to a community of designers.
Welcome to having a voice through design.
Welcome to the Faye Jones School of Architecture and Design.
Welcome.
Oops, sorry. So So I will leave this there and perhaps return to camera. And I realize, as almost always happens, that if you give the microphone to an academic, they will absorb so much more time than they possibly deserve. But still hope that there might be a moment or two for further questions.
Yeah, if people want to put questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you'd like to put a question in the chat, I will read it aloud so that Dean MacKeith can maybe answer it for you. So we'll give people a couple seconds.
Did you say we could just ask questions in general, or we need
Yeah.
to send them through chat only?
Either way.
Dean MacKeith, this is Courtney Little. How's the status on the Structure Lamb facility, and are there other products kind of in the works using the excess fiber and the some of the other materials you spoke of in your presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Courtney, and thank you for attending. The status of the Structure Lamb facility production plant in Conway is they are retrofitting the existing building there. You know, that was a steel fastener building, about 250,000 square feet. They're having to slightly retrofit that, but as I understand it, the big pressing machines are on their way from Europe. They will arrive this summer to be installed this fall, in order to be up and running by early next spring. There is the expectation, I believe, that code certified panels will be rolling out of the factory in 12 months' time. There's a very smart pace being expected of them. As far as the other possibilities, we are, as a school, already experimenting in very productive ways with what I'll simply call sawdust. It's wood dust, hardwood dust, putting it together with a binder and moving it through a 3D printer so that it can obtain a structural shape, becomes in a sense a wood dust based brick in a way that can be used for construction purposes. We're also beginning to look at a whole range of waste products. In fact, I just signed off on a grant proposal that a number of our faculty have made to the National Science Foundation in order to advance the use of, again, wood waste products from small diameter cuttings all the way down to cellulose in ways that would be of material and product benefit. The intention, I will say, at the largest possible scale is, if we're going to take a tree down in the forest, we should, in fact, responsibly be able to use 100% of that tree as close as possible in order to be environmentally good stewards, but also to gain the greatest benefit from the effort expended in cultivating and harvesting that tree.
All right, we have a question here in the chat, Dean MacKeith. It is from Regina Hopper. She said, the work you and this school are doing is amazing. Are there steps that those of us who appreciate your work but aren't in the field help spread the word of what you are accomplishing?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. Yes, and I'd be happy to have further that discussion offline, but I know we've got some of our great staff listening in. I saw Michelle Parks, our Director of Communications, Mary Purvis, Director of Development. Others are, I think, would be able to advise you. I think that, you know, for me, the important part, of course, you could say, is to promote the school, but there is a much more deeper level of this, which is simply to promote the comprehension that design is for everyone. There is, we have, I think, unfortunately arrived at a point at which many people see design as a luxury, as an added cost. And my firm belief is that that is a false narrative, that in fact good design can be obtained for a very small investment, and that in fact it's a longer term investment. Our faculty member, Marlon Blackwell, says that good design can occur any place, at any cost, for anyone, anywhere. And this is an ethos that I think is quite firmly rooted in we'll just say the landscape of this state in particular. There is an economy of means that is valued here that leads, I would argue, to an extraordinary premium of meaning and significance. This, to me, is a vital understanding. If you can take that message forward to young people in particular, people who might see design as being less accessible, costing too much, not worth the investment, never going to get them a job. If you can really work to persuade them to really engage with design in this way, I'd be extremely happy, irrespective of what that might ultimately bring the school.
Great. And let's take one or two more questions. Again, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask it, or if you want to put it in the chat, either way. Might have some people typing. All right. If we don't have any more questions, we're going to wrap this up. We want to thank Dean MacKeith so very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing with us today. This was some great information and a very cool way that you presented it, so I appreciate it.